Granny Chat, the show where we get so far deep within our vaginas. We wonder if we will ever return to society again. Welcoming you. I am recording these on the road. We're currently living in a van, if you haven't already heard on the previous episodes. And I've been recording and starting this journey again with the podcast when I was in Morocco. And we were in Morocco for just under 5 months. And a few days ago, only 2 days actually, we shifted back onto the continent into Spain. And so I'm speaking to you from Spain. And I plan to record this and then I will go and meet my family who are on the beach currently. And it is a really beautiful beach. So I'm excited to go and join them. But I'm just as excited to talk about rest because it's something that I've been thinking a lot about. So today's episode is on rest and when rest does not restore you. So it's on this whole journey of rest that I've been on. Like, what does rest actually look like? So I'm writing a book at the moment about women in society and nervous systems, how our nervous systems and the term nervous system has become a buzzword, something to do, and what does it actually look like to be a woman in this world and ultimately find some level of rest. And what we really have to explore is that often women can actually find rest, but then when they do find that rest, they don't feel restored. So sometimes a woman will sleep, go on holiday, take breaks, and still feel depleted. So I want to speak to that. And if that resonates, then let's go. If it doesn't, and you rest and you feel restored every single time, then amazing, celebrating how you are navigating this world and how you feel that restoration from a result of resting. Over the last few months, I have spent way more time in rest than I ever have in my life. But often what I find is that rest recently, particularly so, hasn't felt restful. So when have I rested? Well, I rested when I've been on my period. So I always try to rest on my period. I did rest on my period before we lived in a van, but I also went through times when I would be driving because it would coincide with driving. But I've been really clear of my boundaries on that and able to rest more deeply in the last 2-3 months. And that has felt really restorative. I've also had the best bedtime habits because the children basically refuse to go to sleep unless they can see that I'm going to bed. And Ali works in the evenings. So we've been trying to navigate the fact that at least one of us will be in the bed. And I sometimes still feel depleted even after those periods of rest. I also I tend to try and keep work to midday. So I work from 7 a.m., 8 a.m. until maximum midday. But on days like today, where it's actually already 3 o'clock, it's because I've had to do a little bit more, and that's also fine. But I don't find myself working erratic hours, and it doesn't feel like life is running away from me. And yet, often recently, I haven't felt restored, and I know exactly why. And I'm going to talk about how we don't always see why we're in that situation. It's just because I talk about this endlessly, and I've explored it for myself and explore it for women, and I've done loads of training, so on and so forth. And then I'm like, I can see my pattern straight away. I can talk about my pattern. It doesn't mean I avoid the pattern. It just means that the pattern exists and I can see it and I can utilize my tools to adjust and shift it. And I'm going to talk about a couple of stories that have come up in the last literally handful of weeks as a result of this rest not restoring me overall and what that might mean for you. So I really think about those women often that have come and worked with me, sat in my cabin, and they said the same thing. Like, I don't know why I still feel tired. I don't know what to do around that. And also just not really understanding how they can approach rest if they still feel tired even when they do rest. And the thing is like there is a particular kind of exhaustion that rest sometimes just cannot touch anyway. So many of us, we take the holiday, we sleep in on a Sunday maybe, if we're allowed, if we can, if we see ourselves doing that. Maybe you had a weekend away, and then you might even go as far as to have a spa afternoon or, a massage. And you are actively engaging in rest and you're still like, I don't get it. How can I actively engage in this rest, be aware of my need for rest, and then when you return from wherever you go, you feel exactly the same, if not sometimes worse? That's something that can often come up. You know, like when you have one of those really bad nights of rest and then, or you go out late or whatever, and then the next day you have your best night's sleep and you're like, mate, I've had a great night of rest, great sleep. You wake up and you're like, but why do I feel worse than I did yesterday? And then you know that the next night will feel better, because it's just how we are designed when it comes to restoration, right? So this lack of feeling restored post tending and mothering ourselves just can sometimes feel like an utter joke. And I felt this for myself, and I've been just so aware of it since leaving the house and traveling and everything just being like extra big because I'm in this small space with my family. So despite getting all this sleep, this rest, I began to feel unsafe in the situation that I've created, because of course, like, fear will always come up in whatever we do. So it's like, I'm in here navigating this. What about everything that's coming up for me? And I'm not going to go into what my fears were, but there were a lot of fears that were coming up, and there were the shoulds and the coulds and scarcity, and rest just was not restoring me. And then we're in this situation where rest isn't restoring, holiday isn't the answer. Often when we're in this like shoulds, coulds, we're feeling unsafe, or we're talking about what we need to do constantly, and we're like, oh, I just need a holiday, maybe I just need a holiday. And then you're like, that doesn't work. I just need a spa afternoon, or I just need a day off, or I just need, and it's like we're expecting miracles from this like rest moment, this restful week, this restful 2 weeks, because it doesn't erase the shoulds, the coulds, the fears, the feeling unsafe, the scarcity mindset that's arising, or whatever else is coming up for you. So the other day I committed to a hammam and a massage, right? I was like, I'm gonna go and have, because I have had hammams, as in I've been into a hammam, I've scrubbed myself, I've scrubbed the children, and I've left. And then the girls and I went to one where we were scrubbed, and then she was like, do you want a massage? And I was like, not really. And then she kind of like got me on the floor, on the hard floor, and like started massaging. It was so uncomfortable because I'm so bony on these like hard floors. I was like, that's not really the vibe. And so we were in this very tourist town, and I was like, okay, do you know what? I'm actually going to just have a hammam and a massage properly, because I'm missing my shiatsu and I'm feeling like I just need a pause and some mothering and some tending. And I knew that although it wouldn't answer much, it would be a moment for me to feel tended to by another woman, which is what I miss quite a lot when I'm in this space. So I committed to it. And over the last like 2-3 weeks before that, I knew that I was feeling a low level of nausea, and I went and had this massage. Even though I know exactly why I was feeling the low level of nausea, the massage was not to solve anything, but simply to soothe. And after an hour of the having been there, so it was like 2 hours overall, it was hammam for an hour and a massage for an hour. I don't normally like normal massages because I think they miss the points that I feel like I need as a woman, like the massages that I created for the women in the cabin, where, and the massages, like the space and the massage that I talked to on the pelvic gold standard pelvic floor journey. That's the massage that I expect every woman to be getting at a bare minimum. And then we go and we're like having the focus on the back, and we're sitting on the front, and then we feel like we're like, you know, on the front for ages. And it's like, mate, my back is fucked anyway. I need you to tend to me and mother me in the spaces that the feminine needs. And that's what I created, and that's what I talk about on this journey, and that's what's missed in massage. But I needed some kind of active touch that was from another woman that would mean I felt mothered. So an hour after I went, well, during the hour after, I went for a tea, mint tea. I started sitting in, I was in the sun. I thought, oh, I feel really hot, I feel really sick. Probably just the sun. Went back to the van and said to Ali, oh, I feel really sick, I don't feel good. And then eventually I was like lying down thinking, no, I feel that low level nausea, that's nothing. This is like full, I feel sick. And then I said and I voiced it. And then Paloma my daughter was like, well, I feel sick. And I thought, she's just doing sympathy sickness. But then it actually turned out that we were both vomiting. We were vomiting all night. Now I look back and I think, well, yeah, you were vomiting all night. She was vomiting alongside you. So it was obviously something that you and her had done. But then I also, the energetic part of me, the energetics work of me is like, she also holds on to a lot of my fears and a lot of my worries, and she tries to mother, even though I keep reminding her that I am not her responsibility, and she is her responsibility to tend to herself if she sees that I'm tending to myself, and that I will tend to her when I'm finished having the cry or whatever. And so we talked about this a lot, and she was vomiting exactly the same times as me. Like literally it was like me, her, me, her. And the other two, they hold on to things differently. She doesn't speak to it, won't explain what's up with her, whereas the other two can and will. And it was really interesting because the stress has been quite peak stress for me. And I wonder whether, because you could say it was a bug, and I waited for everybody else to have this same bug or food poisoning or whatever, but nobody else was sick. And so, yeah, sure, it could have been something she touched, I touched, we held hands, we kissed, whatever. But also I'm like, there is a part of me that thinks, was it in response to the low level nausea that I had and the stress that I had? Just something that I've sat with, and I especially sat with when I was writing and thinking about this podcast. So really it's that reminder that when I rested and paused and allowed, then stuff came up. And obviously when you're sick you feel really vulnerable, and I am the worst sick person. I would love to know if there's anyone as bad as me out there who makes the worst noise. And the children hadn't really heard me being sick because I basically avoid it at all costs. I would rather do anything than be sick. I'm like the sort of person who would have a hangover for days and days and days versus being actually sick. And they were like, you're not okay when you're sick. Like they were really shocked by it. I think because we're in a small space as well. And I'm like really vocal, really purging. And I was crying at times to myself, and I was thinking about all the shit that had been coming up for me, and so on and so forth. So that pause allowed for this purge, this like sadness, this everything. And so I really think about how when we tune into our needs and we rest and we will see and feel what we need to feel. And that's often what's not understood. And although I had been doing it every day in meditation in the morning, returning back to this practice that sometimes goes aloof for a few days or a couple of weeks and then I come back to it, it never completely disappears. Even though I was doing all of that, once I was moving into that space for 2 hours where I started dancing in from this space of more safety because I was more connected with myself, blah, 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 then this all came up. So when we are moving and dancing in life from that, that ventral vagal state, like when we're in that, that's different, that's where digestion works and sleep restores and pleasure is accessible. And then you're present with your children more because there isn't this low hum of everything you haven't done and everything that could be, the shoulds, the coulds, the woulds. And that is the only state where rest actually works from. So when I had a hammam and when I had my massage, I was moving into that ventral vagal. Then I purged, and whether that was a bug or the purge of everything that was, then I had to rest after that. I had to rest. And the resting that I'd been trying before over the last month when all this fear had come up actually wasn't working for me, and I knew it wasn't because I wasn't actually resting. So although the hammam and the massage wasn't something that felt restful and I didn't feel good from it, clearly I needed to move on a longer journey with this. Then when I rested from that, I was just like, oh, fuck it. And then the next day after I'd been sick, my period started, right? Obviously it did. And then I was fully resting. I changed the pillows. I looked out over the sea. I rested. The children were asking me to do things and I had no guilt for the first time in 2-3 months about not going with them. It felt good. So the most high functioning women, right? Like we're talking about women who are running households, having careers, the invisible logistics, emotional labor, but everyone around them, yeah, they're not actually spending that much time in the ventral vagal state. I am one of those high functioning women and I'm very aware of it. I'm very aware of accessing that state and aware of when that state exists for me. And I'm also very aware that you can sell your house and everything in it and live in a van and travel across the world. And obviously, which I already knew before I did all that this wasn't a news flash to me, that we were going to end up in a situation where I was still that high functioning woman. But this time, not running my household, I was running everything that needed to exist logistic wise with the van and fearing my career and everything else about it and fearing all the logistics that were involved, holding on to the emotion of everybody else around me. And so I wasn't really in my ventral vagal state. And although I have been more in rest, I haven't necessarily been in my ventral vagal state. And that's the key here that we're speaking to. So yes, you could be the one that books a holiday, go to a beautiful holiday in Mexico, have the best time, but you're probably the one that did all the invisible logistics of that, held on to the emotional labor of that, organize every part of that. And then when you get there, it's like, oh, I'm on holiday now, it's time to rest. And although you'll probably enjoy it to a point, there may still be, I'm not saying there is, but there may still be that underlying, well, I can't fully rest because I'm having to, and I have had to hold on to all the logistics. And now I want to make sure that everyone's having a lovely time. So we often land deeply into the sympathetic, right? The doing state is where we're trapped weeks, years, whatever it might be. It's like this perpetual state of being ready for everything to collapse. And that's exactly where we often are, definitely where I have been recently. We're in hypervigilance. So I voiced this to Ali. I'm like, hey, I'm in hypervigilance. Can you see it? And he's like, yeah, I can see it. I can see that you're really sad at the moment. And I can see that you really need like that tending, which is why he was all for the hammam and would always be anyway. But he's like, I can see it. And he's like, I know I need to do something myself to help you tend to that. And so when we have the language, it's really, really useful, right? So the sympathetic state where we can scan and we micromanage and all of this, right? We're just like ready for whatever we need to be ready for. It's like we're constantly in a survival. And then we try to rest, it doesn't support us. So we have to look at what our body's default setting is when we actually stop. And that's why it's really fascinating, because this is my point and this will always be my point, because you can always do the work and we can always be that woman that understands it, but it's putting it into practice and how do we really tend to it and acknowledge it and see it fully. And that's why I'm so passionate about pelvic health and the gift of that, because I started utilizing the tools that I knew I needed again when it was clear that because I'd rested so deeply for a few months of this journey. Then when we switched and we started to talk about what this work would look like, and then Nemestia that we've created would look like, which, by the way, if you haven't heard or seen, I have a separate podcast that we record. It's called Nemestia, Nomestia, which means nomad, nest, and Hestia. There's a website, there's an Instagram, there's a YouTube. We started doing all of that probably around like maybe March time. And then in April and May, so over the last 2 months, I started to really think about long term what this would look like, and started to think about where would we go in our lives after the van life. And so that's when the hypervigilance hit. So I was actually in quite a lot of my time in the ventral vagal mode. It was when I realized that something had to shift again, work wise and life wise, that I went back into the sympathetic, and I was able to catch myself, even though I knew it was happening, because I started to have some of my usual coping mechanisms come up. But then they weren't always coming up, the usual ones. I slipped into some other ones, which was the nausea and actually insomnia, which I hadn't had before. And I was aware of why, because I was aware of the hypervigilance. And then I returned to tools that I knew, not the hammam and massage, because that exists for everybody, but things like I returned to my pelvic steaming practice. I returned to my feminine ritual practices. I returned to what it looks like to tend to myself on my period. And I started to explore what the hypervigilance was. And that was also teamed with returning to my root and some of the tools that I use when I ground myself and I'm aware of my ladder and so on and so forth, and everything that I do for myself in order to move from that constant perpetual state of hypervigilance into this really lovely ventral vagal state that doesn't need to happen all the time, but needs to happen more than never, are in this journey that I've created and have created as a result of working with women and the work I've done for myself, which you can find as a link here on this podcast and on my website, which, by the way, I've completely redesigned recently because that's what girlies do when they need to put their fear into something else. So I really recommend looking at that if you're like, but I really want to understand this for myself. I want to understand where I'm at and why I'm at and how I can return to myself. Well, that is through rooted tools, in my opinion. So when a woman who's been in the sympathetic for months and years finally takes the holiday, she's obviously then like on this sun lounger, she opens a book, her body does not relax, her body waits for the next thing, the problem, that someone needs something, because this is what your nervous system is trained to learn. It's like stillness, well, that's temporary, right? Like the rest is the gap between the demands. It's not the real state. So at her core, she's responsible, and responsibility, well, that doesn't go on holiday. So the rest lands on a system that cannot receive it. And then there's this other thing that happens, the thing that women don't talk about as much. And it's where, oh, right, we can actually drop. We can actually stop. We can actually pause. We can actually be. Children might be going to bed, or logistics of work or something else quietens. And then there's this like gap where we want to feel rest and restore or do something for ourselves that brings joy, but often we don't feel relief. We just want to numb out. We just want to be in numbness. We feel maybe flat. We feel like this perpetual empty feeling in those like quieter moments. They are also the thing that exists for us that we don't talk about. So what we do then is we move into the shutdown, we move into the dorsal, because we're just so tired from being hypervigilant that then we just numb out. And that might look like different things for different women, but it might just be like, the fuck is life? Or it might be scrolling, or it might be lying in bed and thinking, I really could open my book, but I just can't face it. Or I really wish I could start that project, but I don't. Or it might be watching Netflix, but not with intention. And it could be a whole range of things. So the question I have is like, do we sometimes, or do we all the time feel like we land in rest, but then we feel numbness to it? Because I know I do. I know that sometimes I need to just numb out to be further from my reality, because when I do that, I can tend to myself and mother myself from a numbing point of view. And then, that's it. I'm like, I don't have to hold it all. I can just, numb. And then if I don't numb, then maybe I'm in like exhaustion, and I don't want to feel that. So that's often what can happen for women. So a question to think about is, how do you feel in your rest? So this is why pausing is really useful. That's why this pause with something that you do that we would deem as self-care, mothering ourselves, tending to ourselves, that is actually useful. Yeah, it's not just a buzzword. That the science is the science. That's what I've been writing about in my book. The science is the science. It's what society has made it into. It is useful to pause because it is useful to hear where you're at. And the cultural solution to these exhausted women that all exist around us is rest. Yeah. But not in the conventional sense, not in the sleep more, do more, take a break that we've been told and sold, but in another way. Because if the nervous system cannot receive rest, if it cannot receive it, if it is too activated to land, or it is in this like collapse mode, then obviously rest will not work. It's like when I had the insomnia. I'm resting. I must go to sleep now. Hypervigilance. I'm not able to rest. I'm not able to receive sleep because I am in this mode. I'm in the sympathetic mode, but I'm currently like to the point of I'm in fight or flight. To be honest, I need to get out of this situation that I have put myself in. And then the only way for me to then move into rest, to sleep, to accept it, to receive it, was to get up and do something for myself. So that might be to get up and do the tools that bring me joy. Then when we can receive the rest, when we can fall asleep, when we can do the things that we need to be able to do, then of course we're not forcing it anymore. Yeah, we're not forcing rest. We're not going lying down like, I can't sleep, trying to force it. That's the worst thing, because then your body's learning that. It's not learning to rest, which is what we're trying to do. So we're not forcing rest on ourselves, because that's just mean. Like, that's just mean. It's like when your children are not ready to go to sleep and you know they're not ready to go to sleep and you're like telling them to sleep. That doesn't work. It doesn't work. So what we have to shift is not more lying down, not more booking of holidays, not more hammams. It's actually, right, rhythm. It's sensory grounding. It's activities that ask the body to be present without demanding anything of them. It's knitting, but I would say that because, you know, I'm a knitter. And actually my daughter is now a knitter, and then announced only a couple of days ago that she feels so relaxed when she knits in bed. But she doesn't ever have a problem with falling asleep, really. Walking without a destination, without a podcast, without music, baking something even slower, sitting in natural sunlight. Small, unglamorous, deeply regulating things. Not a big spa weekend, not a bobs, not productivity of a reset, not a digital detox, you know, with this like post that you're actually digital detoxing. It's what actually brings you, not Sandra down the road, what brings you back into your body, not your head's idea of rest, but your body's idea of rest. And then when we return to that, then that's the change. When we return to the pelvis, which I've already spoken to a little bit, we return to the pelvis and then we can speak to the body from there. So can you sit? Can you breathe into the pelvis? Can you connect to the feminine, to her, to your true essence, to the divine feminine that lies within? Can you connect with that? Can you root down onto the earth and feel held and just pause and see what's there? Because if you are having other things like challenging periods, like more challenging than you've ever had before, or pain during sex, or suddenly you've ovulated later. Why you ovulate? Period is late. No, your period is not late. You've ovulated later because your body couldn't prioritize ovulation because you're too stressed. Do you not feel as aroused during sex? Or perhaps it's not as useful as it used to be. Perhaps there's pain. Perhaps it's just discomfort. Is there any more leaking than normal, or leaking in general? And you're like, mate, I have never leaked, and suddenly you're leaking. What the fuck does that mean? Like, does your discharge suddenly follow an unusual pattern? Or do you not feel wet enough during sex that you're like, that's shifted? So a woman who has been in her sympathetic for years, gripping, managing, holding everything, the architecture of her family, her life, and then that is where it all goes to. It goes to the pelvic floor, it braces, and those other things that we've just spoken to can come up as a result of that bracing. And that's where we begin the work. We begin the work there with curiosity, with attention, slow curiosity, honest curiosity. And that's when we start to notice what's coming up for us. And that's where I had to return to over the last literally half a month or so, because that's where my attention was. And then my previous period, and you can ask my family this exact story, my previous period was unbelievable period pain. Now, if you followed me for a long time, you'll know that I've dealt with my period pain over the years, and it's been quite a long journey. If you read my book, you will read the journey in that, and I am able to navigate my period as long as I actually understand where the discomfort comes from with some level of ease. Now, the last period was unbelievable pain. I can't even remember the last time it was so bad. And I know that it was during the time because that was also where the hypervigilance truly started, before I started to connect into it properly over the last like 2-3 weeks. I was in so much agony. I had my first 3 days, then we drove and I was like, well, my period is here, but it's not here. We drove, I stood up, the pain, which is unheard of on like day 3 or 4 of my period, was like my period had just started again, like it just began. And I was in agony, had to lie down for the rest of the day and couldn't do anything. And I had actually rested for some of that period as well. So yeah, it wasn't day 3, it was day 4, sorry. It might have even been day 5. And the children were like, oh gosh, mummy's not feeling it. And they all had to just leave me in the van and go out for lunch without me, in Morocco, where going out for lunch was just as cheap as buying food. So it was one of those situations where I was like, it's now, my body is speaking, my pelvis is speaking, it is bracing. And it was there that I was like, there it is. This needs to be looked into. Pausing, noticing what was coming up for me. Instantly there it was, the hypervigilance, the fear, and the lack of support that I was feeling from Ali, that had to be voiced. But without that, without my body bracing, but without acknowledging it, then that wouldn't have come up. So that's why I'm so passionate about pelvic floor work, about the pelvic health in general of a woman, and how we utilize this information so that we can tend to ourselves from the root up. And how that journey, and this is why I'm speaking to it, has been so beautiful for me over the last few weeks. Because not only that have I been able to verbalize it, but Ali and I had to go deep into our relationship to start to explore what that looks like in a space where I had not been feeling held for a while, and really approach the relationship again with like another set of fresh eyes, again, but without me understanding my needs, which I've spoken to repeatedly in this podcast already. Then I was unable to communicate that with him, and then we wouldn't be where we are today with our relationship and life. So what we have to really be with is that rest needs to restore, and rest that restores is the rest that the whole system can receive. And that starts with understanding what your nervous system has been learning to do recently or over time, and we've got to teach it and guide it with something different. So that is my exploration. That is this journey today on the podcast. And I'm sending so much love. If you're also experiencing anything that I've spoken to, you know where the journeys are, you know where that support lies in this space. You can find it in the place that I've already shared, in the link on the website. I truly believe you wouldn't regret a single 10-minute video that I've created. That journey is not like the courses that you will have done before, because it is a manageable space, truly manageable space, where you just have to commit to short videos, explorations as and when you want to. It's a lifetime access. It's easy. It's there, and will give you something tangible to move forward with, and maybe kind of open up a new avenue that you might not have thought about before. So I'm sending love, and yeah, I'm gonna go and sun myself in the med heat. So I'm sending love.